Good afternoon and welcome to the MAP Talk and what the future holds for Tucson's economy and housing market. I'm Jennifer Pullen, the program coordinator for the MAP dashboard and a senior research economist in the Economic and Business Research Center in Eller College of Management at the University of Arizona. We're excited to have two great guest speakers join us this afternoon. Welcome David Galaski from Zaba and Will White from Land Advisors. We'll do more formal introductions prior to your presentations, but we're really pleased to have both of you joining us today. Dr. George Hammond will kick things off in just a moment with a brief overview of Tucson's economy, and then I will briefly discuss the latest data reported on the map on Tucson's housing market trends. But first, I'd like to go over a few logistics for the presentation. So all of the map talks are recorded. Sorry, we're not advancing here. All of our map talks are recorded, and we will post on the MAP website. It should be up later this evening or tomorrow at the latest. We encourage you, if you enjoyed the presentation today, to share it with your colleagues and to forward that link on the MAP website to anybody that you think might be interested in watching today's presentation. Everyone will be in conference mode. It is a webinar, so you will be muted. We encourage you to ask questions. We actually want you to ask lots of questions. So at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A button, and there's also a chat button. You can ask any question you have during the presentation, and we'll answer all questions at the end of all four presentations today. So anytime during the presentation, just use that Q&A button or the chat button to ask a question. If you prefer, you can email me. I'll have my email open. You can email me your questions there at jknipe@arizona.edu. So before we begin, I'd like to thank the MAP partners and sponsors. Without their support of the MAP dashboard, events like today wouldn't be possible. Our partners include the Community Foundation for Southern Arizona, Pima Association of Governments, Southern Arizona Leadership Council, Sun Corridor, and the University of Arizona. Our sustaining sponsors include Freeport-McMoran Foundation, Newport Marketing, the Thomas R. Brown Family Foundation, and Tucson Electric Power. I'd also like to acknowledge our media sponsor, the Arizona Daily Star. Look for MAP features on the front page of the Business and Health section each month. And with that, I'd now like to welcome Dr. George Hammond. George is the director of the Economic and Business Research Center at the Eller College of Management at the University of Arizona. George is here today to walk us through the recent trends in Tucson's economy. Welcome, George.
Thanks, Jennifer. Thanks, Jennifer. And thank you, everybody, for attending. It's great to be here with you. So I am going to go ahead and share my screen. Jennifer, if you could turn off your share. Okay. So you should be seeing the first slide of my presentation now, and Jennifer, let me know if that's not the case. So my job today is to give you a quick overview of where the Tucson economy is at the moment, and we'll talk a little bit about where it may be headed over the next couple of years, particularly from the perspective of population growth, which is obviously a key driver of the housing sector. Now, before I get too far into that, I want to do a little bit of shameless self-promotion here. So our annual Economic Outlook Luncheon will be held this year at the Westin La Paloma on December 8th, 2023. I will be presenting on the current performance and outlook for Arizona, Phoenix, and Tucson. And we will have Gus Fauché, the chief economist for PNC Bank, our presenting sponsor, will be talking about the global and national economy. So we would love to see you there, and registration is open. You can get to the registration page pretty easily. You'll see that in red, and that's available at eller.arizona.edu/outlook/2023. So keep that in mind. We'll be sending out the registration email late this weekend or first thing on Monday. So keep an eye out for that. Okay, let's talk about the Tucson economy, and we'll kick things off by talking about the labor market. Now, this graph shows Tucson and U.S. unemployment rates, and you can see that Tucson's unemployment rate is currently in the neighborhood of the national average, and just like the U.S., Tucson's unemployment is really low. It's been very close to historic lows in Tucson, and it's been at historic lows for the national economy. With the most recent data that we have for Tucson, the seasonally adjusted unemployment rate was about 3.8%. It's roughly equal to the national average. And the way economists kind of talk about that or think about that is really kind of in two ways. On one side of the coin, we think about this from the perspective of employers. And employers like us, many of us are seeing, a very tight, a very competitive labor market. And all we mean by that is that it takes a lot of work to find employees with the right skill mix. We're having to bid competitively for those employees. It takes a long time to hire. So for businesses, a tight labor market means that we have to work really hard to find and retain our employees. The other side of that coin is from the worker perspective, and what workers are seeing is lots of job opportunities out there. Now, we are seeing just a little bit of loosening in the labor market. As you can see, if you kind of squint at the right-hand side of the graph, you'll see that unemployment rates have ticked up just a tiny bit. We're also seeing that initial claims for unemployment insurance have increased modestly. They're up 15 to 20% at the moment from where they were a year ago. But even so, initial claims are still, well below where they were before the pandemic began. In terms of the ratio of job openings to the number of unemployed individuals, that has begun to come down a little bit. But even so, both for Arizona and the U.S., that ratio remains well above where it was before the pandemic began. Something that we track here in the Economic and Business Research Center are firm announcements of new jobs and expansions, and we also track firm announcements of job losses or firm closures. And we are seeing announcements of job loss and firm closures ticking up a little bit, and firm announcements of job growth or expansion are ticking down a little bit, but they're still the announcements of job loss are still pretty low, and the announcements of job gain are still relatively high. They're just trending a little bit in the more modest direction. So that's three little pieces of evidence that we're seeing modest loosening in the labor market. We're also seeing a little bit of evidence of loosening in the labor market in what we see in the wage data. And I think the best measure of what's happening with wage growth and employee compensation is the employment cost index from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. These data are nice because they cover both wages and salaries and fringe benefits. They also are adjusted for employment flows across industries and occupations. And if we're comparing what's going on now to what happened during the pandemic, that's an important sort of correction to have. And what we're seeing in the employment cost index for the U.S. and for the Phoenix metro area, unfortunately we don't have this data for Tucson, but what we're seeing is a modest slowdown in compensation growth. Both for Phoenix and the U.S., it peaked at about 5.5% over the year, about this time last year, and we're now down to 3.9% growth in Phoenix and about 4.5% growth nationally. So, a little bit of a slowdown in compensation growth, but, even so, that's, at 3.9 to 4.5%, that's still fairly rapid compensation growth. Some of the fastest growth we've seen in a decade or so. So, a little bit of loosening in the labor market here in Tucson, but nothing really big yet. No big shift yet. The labor market still looks pretty good and pretty tight here in Tucson. Now let's talk about inflation. As we all know, inflation really surged last summer, and we measure that, at least on this slide, using the All Items Consumer Price Index. And what's displayed here are over-the-year growth rates. So these are over-the-year inflation rates. In other words, the inflation rate for August 2023 compares the level of the Consumer Price Index in August 2023 to what we observed in August 2022. Now you can see both for Phoenix and the U.S. inflation has come down significantly. It peaked at just over 9% nationally last summer. It peaked in Phoenix at a much higher pace at 13% roughly last summer. And for both, inflation has come down significantly. It's come down a bit faster in Phoenix, and as of August, this all items consumer price index inflation was the same in Phoenix as it was for the U.S. Now, what drove Phoenix inflation so far above the national average, and why has Phoenix inflation come down? We can get some clues there by actually breaking out the consumer price index into its component indices. And kind of the way to think about the consumer price index is that it's a weighted average of price changes for the goods and services that households, people like you and I, purchase as part of their daily lives. Now, the weights are calculated by how big a share of an average household's budget a given good or service is. The larger the share of a household's budget a purchase is, the greater is its weight. Now, it turns out that by far the single biggest component of the consumer price index and for household budgets is housing. And within housing, shelter is by far the biggest component. And the shelter consumer price index includes straight rents, so what a renter pays each month. But it also includes a measure of what's called owner's equivalent rent. And this is an attempt by the Bureau of Labor Statistics to measure the housing costs for homeowners. We want something comparable to rents for homeowners. We don't want to just drop homeowners out. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics estimates this imputed owner's equivalent rent, and that just boils down to an estimate of what it would cost a homeowner to rent their house to themselves. Now, those two together are a key reason why inflation spiked up, particularly in Phoenix, and why it's come back down. As you no doubt remember, and as you will see in the following presentation, house prices in Phoenix, and we saw the same thing here in Tucson, really started to skyrocket last year, and they were rising at 20, 30% over the year, and that impacted the measured inflation. Now, we've seen house prices have peaked and at least either come down or are rising at a somewhat slower pace, depending on whether we're looking at Phoenix or Tucson, and that's helped to bring inflation back down. So inflation has come down, and that is certainly good news, but you want to keep in mind that what we're looking at here is the rate of change of prices over a period of time. Now, even though inflation has come down compared to where it was last year, the price level is still well above where it was before the pandemic began, and it's likely to stay well above where it was before the pandemic began as we move forward. Okay, let's talk about the future a little bit. And this graph shows you U.S. population. These are projections from a large U.S. macro forecasting and consulting firm. They go by S&P Global. And this shows U.S. population and the share of the U.S. population age 65 and older. And a couple things to take away from this graph. Notice that US population growth is expected to decelerate as we go through the next 30 years, and it has been decelerating for a while. Overall, on average, U.S. population growth over the next 30 years is expected to be a little bit less than half of what it was during the prior 30-year period. Now, part of what's driving that population growth slowdown is a demographic shift. And by that I mean the aging of the baby boom generation. That tends to drive up deaths, and certainly sorry to see that. Being a baby boomer myself, I'm not looking forward to that, but it is something that we will continue to see, rising deaths each year. And it's also putting downward pressure on births and the birth rate. And that significantly slows overall population growth. Now you can see in terms of what's going on with the share of the U.S. population age 65 and older, it's been rising for a while now, but it's still got a ways to go before the Census Bureau and S&P Global think it's going to kind of level off. So at least another decade or so before that starts to slow down. So overall, we're likely looking at slower population growth here in the U.S. over the next 30 years compared to what we've seen during the prior 30 years. And I think we'll see something similar in the Tucson metropolitan area. So this shows average annual growth rates for Tucson's population compared to the U.S. And you can see that Tucson's population growth is expected to slow significantly over the next 30 years. We generally outpace by a little bit the national growth rate, but it's slower growth each year compared to at least our average during the prior 30-year period. Now, for a state or a local area like Tucson, there are really two big components of population growth. One is natural increase. That's just the annual difference between births and deaths. That's already pretty weak in Tucson. In fact, it's negative at the moment in Tucson, and I think that's going to continue to be true as we go through the next 30 years. And that means that all of Tucson's population growth that you see here is driven by net migration. And net migration is just the annual difference between those who move in and those who move out. So we expect overall net migration into Tucson to remain positive, and that will be the major driver of our population growth. And that makes it a good time to look at where Arizona, Phoenix, and Tucson draw most of their migrants from. Now, all three geographies draw migrants from every state in the nation. But the state that contributes by far the most is California. So, one thing that will be really key is that we continue to draw migrants from California. And this is where housing affordability and the overall cost of living in Arizona, Phoenix, and Tucson relative to California will be particularly important. I think we'll continue to maintain a significant advantage on that score. So I think we're going to continue to draw migrants, a significant number of migrants from California. So let me quickly summarize. Overall, Tucson's labor market's very tight with low unemployment, solid job growth, somewhat slowing wage growth. Inflation is slowing, but we've got a long way to go to get back to 2%, the Fed's target. The price level, however, is likely to remain well above pre-pandemic levels. Overall, Tucson's population growth is forecast to slow, and what's really driving that is the aging of the baby boom generation. But Tucson, I think, is going to continue to attract migrants from all states, particularly those from California, and that's going to really fuel our population growth. So with that, I will conclude my remarks, and I will throw it back to you, Jennifer.
Thanks, George. I am going to screen share now, and now that George has talked to us or walked us through the Tucson's economy, I'm going to talk a little bit about the housing trends that we've seen on the map dashboard. And I think a lot of what I'm going to discuss today will relate to what David and Will are going to discuss during their presentations. George, can you see my presentation okay?
Yes, I can. Looks good.
Perfect. Okay, so We're going to start kind of big picture, talk about what's going on with home prices and rental prices, and then we'll move on to what that means for affordability in our region. So in Tucson, in the during 2022, the median home price in Tucson increased by 12.3% to $371,900. That was approximately a $40,000 increase over the median in 2021. You can see that here in the outer ring of the fuel gauge. Kind of, we always try to track that trend, the recent growth or trend that's going on in our fuel gauges. And so in 2021, that was $331,200. So about a $40,000 increase, or 12.3% over the year. And so despite the rapid growth in Tucson's median home price that we've seen over the last several years, not just between 2021 and 2022, Tucson still remains relatively still has a relatively low median home price relative to its peers. And, this is what George mentioned with affordability and in drawing migrants from California. As you can see, San Diego, for example, that median home price in 2022 was $911,000. There, Denver, $670,000, Portland, $591,000. So still, we're just right below the nation here at $392,000. And a little bit higher than some of our pure Western metros in Texas and New Mexico here. El Paso, the lowest at $237,000. So here's that median home price trend. This is quarterly data. This is showing on the bottom, on the x-axis, you can see here, we've got every other quarter reported from 2017 through the second quarter of 2023. And Tucson's median home price reached a peak here. Tucson is represented by that orange line. So it reached a peak, an all-time high in the second quarter of 2022 at $380,000. It then declined for the next 3 quarters, similar to what we saw nationally. This green line is the nation. This blue line is Phoenix. So in this last 2 quarters of 2022 and the first quarter of 2023, we saw home prices kind of flatten in Tucson or decline just a little bit during those 3 quarters. That was consistent nationally and in Phoenix and in all of the metropolitan areas that we track on the map dashboard. Then in the second quarter of 2023, we saw that Tucson reached a new all-time high median home price at $383,700. That's consistent again, like you can see with the green line, with the nation and with Phoenix. So we saw home prices increase at a rapid rate in 2021 and the beginning of 2022. This was, strong demand was meeting limited supply and rising construction costs. So home prices then began to cool in the second half of 2022. That kind of coincided with the interest rates increasing. And so as interest rates increased, we saw that home prices kind of flattened or cooled off just a tiny bit. And we also saw, as we'll see in the next graph, that inventory started to increase a little bit during the second half of 2022 and early 2023 as well. And so that helped to kind of flatten or reduce those home prices. And so this is really important to track this median home price and affordability, like we'll look at later, because the home is often the largest asset for most people, and the price one pays for their home can affect spending in other areas. It affects their discretionary income, and it influences how much they can spend on childcare, on healthcare, on education, and sometimes even on basic necessities like food and clothing. So increasing prices can lead to affordability issues. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. Here's that inventory graph that I mentioned, and you can see here during 2021, we had historically low inventory. So this is the number of available homes for sale in the Tucson metropolitan area. And so that is historically low in 2021. We saw that increase, like I mentioned, that coincided with that kind of flattening or softening of median home prices. And then more recent data has shown that we have a downward trend, and we're now just slightly above our historic lows that we saw during 2021. And if you see this last orange bar, this is the number of homes that were available for sale in the 5th month or May of 2023 is just above that historic low and well below what we saw during the last decade. And so that's home prices, but what about rent prices? So we looked at the average rent of 1 and 2 bedroom apartments for the Tucson metropolitan area and its peer communities. And this data is the most recent data from the second quarter of 2023. And rent during the second quarter of 2023 was $1,352. That was the average rent for a 1 and 2 bedroom apartment. That increased slightly from the second quarter of 2022. So year over year, it was about a 2.6% increase. But like we'll see in a moment, we had rapid increases in the years prior in rental prices. And so again, just like median home prices, Tucson is relatively low compared to its peer metropolitan areas. Again, San Diego here leading the way off the gauge here at almost $2,400 for the average rent for a 1 and 2 bedroom apartment, followed by Denver. And then Austin. Again, Tucson just below the nation, just like with median home prices, rent prices are just below the nation, and just a little bit ahead of Albuquerque, San Antonio, and El Paso. So if we look at the trend data, so this is the average growth rate in rent for 1 and 2 bedroom apartments from 2018 through 2023. And so we can see between 2017 and 2018, 2018 to 2019, 2019 to 2020, we saw this is about rent increased at about 5%. And then between 2020 and 2021, it increased by 17.1%. And then between 2021 and 2022, it increased again by 14.8%. So over a 2-year time period, 2020 to 2022, we saw rent for 1 and 2 bedroom apartments increasing by more than 30%. And then like home prices, we saw a softening kind of in that later part of 2022 and early 2023, and with the growth rate declining. The average rent still increased in Tucson between 2022 and 2023. It increased by 2.6%. Nationally, it held steady, it increased by 0.5%. But in Phoenix, we actually saw rent decline between 2022 and 2023 by 3.3%. That was also the case for about half of the pure metropolitan areas that we track on the map dashboard. So about half of the metros saw rent decline between 2022 and 2023, and the other half saw modest growth around, just a couple percentage points of growth between 2022 and 2023. But remember, that was followed by about 30% increase in rent for 1 and 2 bedroom apartments from 2020 to 2022. I wanted to, real quick before we move on, I want to mention that if you visit the map dashboard website and you see all of these grayed out geographies that I have on this graph, all of this data is available. You can go on the website, you can click on and off this geography. So maybe you're interested in how Portland compares to Tucson. So you click off Phoenix, click off the US, click on Portland, and it will generate a line for you for Portland. Also, if you go up here to these 3 bars, you can download our data, all of the data that we have available on the map dashboard for all of our geographies. You can download into an Excel file or CSV file. You can save all of our images, use them in your presentations. You can save this as a JPEG, as a GIF. We encourage you to go to the website, use our images, use our fuel gauges, and use them in your presentations and reports. Just make sure you give credit to the map. So I wanted to just briefly mention some data that we looked at a while back, and that was the percentage of homes that are renter occupied. And this data is from 2018. I suspect we'll probably update this article that I'm going to mention here in early 2024 when we get the 2022 data. But this looks at the percent of homes or single family homes that are renter occupied. And in Tucson kind of falls in the middle of its pure metropolitan areas at just under 40% of single family homes are renter occupied. But in this article, we have this mapped out by census tract. So we look at the data not just for the Tucson metropolitan area, but also for all of Pima County by census tract. And so here you can see if you live near Davis-Monthan or you live near the university, you have a much greater percentage of renter occupied housing units as you'd expect. And so over 75% of single family homes in these census tracts that are dark blue are renter occupied. So you can visit this article on the map and you can check out what your neighborhood or census tract, what percentage of homes in your region are renter occupied. So now I want to talk about some of the impacts of the price increases that we've seen, and that's really affordability. So in the second quarter of 2023, we saw that 38.6% of homes in the Tucson metropolitan area that were sold, these are single family homes sold during the second quarter, were affordable to someone earning the local median family income. So that median family income measure comes from HUD, that's US Department of Housing and Urban Development, and that median family household income number was $86,000. So 38.6% of the homes sold in the second quarter of 2023 were affordable to someone earning $86,000. So if we think about that, we think 38.6% is a pretty low number, right? Only 38.6% of homes sold, but we still do relatively well compared to our peers. We have one of the highest affordability rates, only beat by San Antonio and Albuquerque just slightly at 40.1 and 40.5%. The nation also at 40.5%, and doing much, much better than many of our peers, 6.3% for San Diego, 18.5% for Las Vegas. And this kind of plays into what George was talking about with migration, is that homes are so much more expensive and less affordable in San Diego that we get some migration from those states. That also in turn helps to push up prices in Tucson. But let's look at the trend overall, and you can see over the last couple of years that from this graph that housing affordability has declined significantly. So 3 years ago in 2020, again, this is quarterly data. In 2020, 75% of the homes sold to someone earning the local median family income were affordable. And so that local median family income in 2020 was about $68,000. So median family income has increased. And when we calculate housing affordability, really 3 different things factor into a housing affordability. What are the home prices what are the prices that homes are being sold for in that quarter? What is the interest rate? And what is the region's local income? So each of these affordability calculations are based on your local income. So they're kind of all cost of living adjusted, right? So we're looking at specific for Tucson, what percentage of homes sold in Tucson, someone earning that local income can afford those homes. And so here it's all 35 percentage point decline over 3 years. And but still you can see Phoenix, right? Phoenix has declined by even more than Tucson during this time period. Housing affordability is an important measure to track, just like we're going to talk about with housing cost burden in the next slide, because really it factors into how much disposable income households have to spend on other goods and services. So the last topic I want to talk about here is housing cost burden. And this looks at the percentage of households that are spending more than 30% of their income on their housing related expenses. So this is your mortgage, your taxes, your insurance, or your rent and your utilities. So overall in Tucson, 21.3% of households in 2021 spent more than 30% of their income on their housing related expenses. We expect that this will probably increase when we start to get the 2022 and 2023 data. And if we look at this by tenure, it tells a different story. We see that for homeowners, 21.3% of homeowners are considered housing cost burden, but more than 50% of renters are considered housing cost burden. And this holds across the nation, across the state, across our peer metropolitan areas, where we're seeing more than 50% of renters are paying more than 30% of their income in their rent and their utilities. And so this is in part due to some of the demographics of renters. We see that renters tend to be younger. They tend to be kind of that college age or beginning of career age. And they also tend to be older, retirees that are on fixed incomes. They also tend to be single income households. So that is some of the difference of why renters have higher housing cost burden rates than owners. And again, just like housing cost burden rates are very important because research has shown that these individuals struggle to pay for other goods. If you're housing cost burden, you struggle to pay for other goods like childcare, education, healthcare, and basic necessities. And so the last thing I want to talk about is housing cost burden by income. And this is exactly what we would expect, that households in lower income brackets have higher housing cost burden rates. But what really stands out to us when we look at this graph is what happens at the lower income brackets in Tucson relative to the nation. And so if we look at that lowest income bracket, that less than 20,000, we see that there just under 38% of households are considered housing cost burden, compared to 30% statewide and just under 32% nationally. Again, that 20,000 to 35,000 income bracket, 30% of households are considered housing cost burden, while nationally only 25.5%. As we increase our income, we become equal with the nation. And then for our higher income bracket, 75,000 or more, a lot smaller percentage of households are housing cost burden, 4.8% compared to the nation, 11.7%. But what stands out and concerns us is these two lower income brackets. And what this tells us is that it begs the question of what's going on with our lower income brackets. Do we have less affordable options in Tucson for those in our lower income brackets than nationally? Why do we have higher housing cost burden rates for our lower income individuals than what we see nationally? And so I will leave you with that. And I would like to, I'll stop my screen share and welcome David now to turn on his video and his screen. We're really pleased to have you with us today, David. It's really an honor to have you come and present. David Golaski is the president and CEO of the Southern Home Builders Association. David's been with SABA since 2008. He's been the associate's president since 2011. In that position, he oversees the day-to-day operations for the association and leads its government and community engagement efforts. David is a member of the Pima County Affordable Housing Commission and also the co-chair of the Tucson Regional Water Coalition. Welcome, David. I'll turn things over to you now. And if you have any questions during David's presentation, please ask them in our chat or Q&A.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you, Jennifer. I appreciate that introduction. Happy Friday, everyone. I appreciate you taking some time out of your day to be with us. A lot of great content so far from George and Jennifer. So in my role as the executive director here at SABA, I manage all things from government affairs to networking events to our home show to working with local construction trade programs. Today, I'm here to try and play the part of a housing expert and share with you what I see, my thoughts and observations of what's happening in home building here in Southern Arizona. Get the opportunity to talk with a lot of builders and hear from them. And so want to share what I know with you today. So, as I was preparing for this presentation, there was a tune, one of my favorite songs that kept popping into my head. Did that slide transfer? Did that go over?
No, we're still seeing your start slide, David.
Uh-oh. Let me see if I can get it. All right, there it is. So, George, did that work?
Yes, it did.
All right, so I doubt the Grateful Dead were predicting what's happening in Tucson's housing market when they wrote this song, but I think it really sums it up nicely. I definitely think the past few years have been particularly strange, but in reality, it goes back much further. So think about this for a second. So from 2004 to 2006, the Tucson MSA averaged just under 10,000 single family permits. So for that 3-year stretch, we were averaging 9,977 housing permits a year. Everything was simply going gangbusters. We were one of the fastest growing communities in the country. Builders were holding lotteries just to see who might have a chance to buy a new home. I still keep a slide in my office from a presentation around that time that was predicting the Tucson Metro doing 13,000 single family permits in 2010. In reality, in 2010, we did under 2,000. 1,865 permits to be exact. Obviously, that was caused by the Great Recession. But in short, we really spent a decade overbuilding, followed by a decade of underbuilding. And then just as we started getting back to what would be more normal permit numbers, COVID happened. And so we went through a period of time. We had a global pandemic combined with unprecedented supply chain issues, combined with skyrocketing material prices and a lack of labor to build the homes to keep up with demand. But yet, nonetheless, permit numbers spiked in 2020, 2021, and the first part of 2022. And then in the mid 2022, interest rates went up and permits went down. You know, the big issue driving the market during that, summer 2022 period was the significant number of cancellations where people had been thinking that they were purchasing a new home at a 3.5% mortgage interest rate, and that had jumped substantially while that home was being built. So to adapt, builders had to get creative. One of the strategies that they've gone to is actually trying to buy down those rates, and now permits are back on the rebound. So let's look at the big picture of where things are at the present moment. So as I was just talking about, the market is continuing to evolve. It's ever constant. Changes can happen quick, and we've certainly seen a lot of changes recently. So we ended 2021 with the most number of single-family permits since 2007. Then if you look at January of this year, we were actually down 64% in the number of permits from January 2022. So in that relatively short amount of time, we went from one of the most recent high number of permitting years to really to a point where things had fallen off substantially. Things are improving. At the end of September, permits were only down 10% year over year. Obviously, mortgage interest rates are continuing to complicate matters, not just the rate itself, but the associated uncertainty about where they're going. Are they going to go up? Are they going to go down? Are they going to stay the same? This particularly impacts a lot of the local builders. I was talking to one recently who said, people are just really skittish about locking in right now, and so they're feeling the effect for sure. Build times are also a really important dynamic in the market today. Before COVID, average build times were, somewhere in that 3, 4, 5 months time period. Then during COVID, build times ballooned to 10 to 12 months. Now they've come back a bit. I would say it's 6, 7 months or so to build a home right now. There are lingering supply chain and labor issues. From my perspective, I see the supply chain issues improving substantially. I think we're going to get past that sooner than later, but labor will continue to be a lingering issue in the market. We're just not attracting the workers to the construction trades that we need to. And then when the interest rate spiked last summer, builders hit pause on buying land, opening up new subdivisions. They've slowly started to pick back up, but it's going to be difficult to be able to meet demand into the future. I know Will's going to get into that during his presentation. One of the interesting facts about our market, so we have 9 builders that are building approximately 85% of all the homes. And by my count, all but 2 of those are Wall Street traded companies. And just to give you a perspective, I think it was that number 9 on that list so far this year had built about 150 homes. And then if you look at the largest privately held regional builder, they've only built 29 homes so far this year. There are many factors that you have heard about or are going to hear about today that affect the price of new homes staying elevated, at least in the short term. So now let's take a look at some trends. This chart, you can see the number of permits and closings since 2011, as well as the resale activity. One thing to point out, 2015, actually things pulled back a little bit in 2015. Permits were lower than the year prior. 2018 and 2019, things were starting to feel really good. I think if you looked at, and Will might have this in his slide, but really kind of on average, for like a 20-year average or year average or so, we should be 4, maybe 5,000 in permits a year. So we were looking pretty good, like we were going to get there in 2018 and 19. You see the big jump in activity during those COVID years, and then that fall off in 2022. So far in 2023, we're at 2,775 permits. Builders are starting more inventory homes to better meet the market demand and to control costs, certainly. There is a chance that we finish the year close to where we ended 2022. I think we're probably going to be somewhere in the range of maybe 3,300, potentially as high as 3,700 permits for 2023. Now let's take a look at where the activity is occurring. This chart shows the growth by community. Pima County has been and continues to be the place where the most home building activity is occurring. Marana at one point in time had been running neck and neck with Pima County, has fallen off, but Marana is definitely positioned for a lot of growth long term. City of Tucson has had a lot of ups and downs over the years. Currently, they're on an upswing. From my perspective, I think a lot of that is just trying to get through the backlog of plan review and permitting activity that they've had in their system. They had some challenges in moving projects through their development services process, but there's been a lot of movement over the past several months in that area. The other communities, Oro Valley, Sahuarita, Southern Pinal County, continue just to bump along there. And I would say, just kind of from my observation, if you want to look at the kind of the core growth areas, you've got growth occurring in the Southwest, growth occurring in the Northwest, that Marana area, and then the Southeast and Vail continues to be an area where there's a lot of growth. We've talked here about affordability. It's obviously probably the biggest topic that's on everyone's mind. This chart shows that steady rise in home prices since 2010 for both new and resale homes. There's been a lot of things that have fluctuated, but home pricing isn't one of those. That upward trend has been pretty constant. It also shows the 30-year mortgage interest rate. So at present, not only do we have high home prices, but we have high rates compared to what we've had at least in the past decade or so. So what is impacting demand? As I was talking about affordability, yesterday I was playing around with a mortgage calculator online. If you look at a 7.5% interest rate with 20% down, the monthly mortgage payment for the median home price is just over $2,600. At 3.5%, that payment's $1,800. That's a significant blow to buying power. Not to mention, when you talk about the size of a down payment, if you're using traditional financing, $80,000 down on a $400,000 home is just a really big number. If you're locked in at a low interest rate, which many of us are, you're likely going to hold on to that house as tight as or as long as possible. This means that homes aren't coming onto market. Jennifer showed the slide that had the inventory that's currently on market. We still have historically low resale inventory, but that's something that the builders are benefiting from. Low resale inventory means people are looking towards new home construction. more apartments are coming online. That's going to help. But Tucson certainly isn't building the same kind of volume of apartments that other markets like Phoenix are doing. And looking into the future, there's definitely a lot of uncertainty. Typically in an election year, what we've heard and experienced is things have been tightened. There is also concern about larger macroeconomic issues. Are we going to be able to achieve that soft landing? Are we in for a hard landing? And certainly, anytime you see these types of global conflicts playing out, that causes a ripple effect into the local markets as well. So, taking a look at the factors influencing supply, Southern Arizona has really relied on master plan communities to meet our housing needs. We've had some fantastic master plans over the years: Continental Ranch, Gladden Farms, Dove Mountain, Rancho Saurita, Rancho Vistoso, to name a few. These were great successes, but have largely been built out or are close to that. It's incredibly difficult to bring a master plan community to market today. So fewer subdivisions, that means fewer places for the builders to sell homes. They like to call their subdivisions stores. So just think about it. If there are fewer stores, there's fewer things to sell out of. There's a significant amount of land that's around us here in Southern Arizona that we could build upon, but that's controlled by the state land department. Going through that process takes substantial amount of time. Takes a substantial amount of money, takes a substantial amount of energy. So that's not an easy lift. As I touched on, we're not out of the woods in terms of supply chain and labor. They are improving, but that's certainly an impact today. From my opinion, infrastructure, or perhaps it's really the lack thereof, will be one of the more pivotal pieces of whether as a community we're able to continue to meet the long-term, our long-term housing needs. So what does that all mean? Where's home building going over the next 6 to 12 months? All signs seem to point to the fact that mortgage interest rates are going to continue to be elevated, at least where they've been recently. There is the possibility that interest rates still go up. We're going to hear more about what's happening in terms of land transactions in the land market soon, but that's going to be another key piece of what's going to happen here in the near future. From my perspective, I think by and large, the builders are locked in with what they need for 2024, but it's looking at 2025 and beyond what everybody's worried about. Are we going to gap out and not have those stores to be able to sell those homes from? And really, it's not just whether or not land deals can get done, but is the land ready? Is it available? And is it in the location that it needs to be able to keep up with the patterns of growth and where people want to buy? The regulatory process obviously plays a factor, and it can be a very slow process. It can be very tedious process. So that's another core dynamic. And I think that's obviously going to play a key role. The labor aspect of it. My board chairman, he's a second generation home builder. He's actually convinced that what's going to happen is that the way we build homes is going to have to adapt to meet up with the labor that we have. It's just going to continue to prove to be very difficult to bring young people into the construction trades. This means permitting is likely going to stay flat, and upward pressure is still going to apply to housing prices. We do have several wild cards. You've noticed I've touched on interest rates quite a bit. Earlier this week, the National Association of Home Builders, the National Association of Realtors and the Mortgage Bankers Association called on the feds to halt interest rate hikes. My guess is those calls go unanswered, but who knows? Our legislature could get involved in housing and take some action, pass bills. There have been 2 comprehensive housing reform bills that were introduced in the legislature each of the last 2 legislative sessions. If we got some legislative reform passed, that could certainly be a good thing, or the legislature could opt to do something like pass rent control or inclusionary zoning, which wouldn't. The local regulatory landscape can be a wild card as well. Every time a municipality is looking at passing a new ordinance affecting land development or housing, costs go up. Working with a community at present who is going to be looking at changing their recreation area requirements, the amount of recreation area space that's being provided by the builders. They're proposing doubling what's required today. And that is not only going to reduce the number of homes that'll be built within a community, but it's going to have another correlation on housing prices. So some communities are taking a look at trying to look at adding more tools in the toolbox, accessory dwelling units, tiny homes, looking at what can be done to speed up the process. Speed to market is a huge factor in all of this. Perhaps the biggest unknown would have to be water. We had some bad news related to the Phoenix AMA groundwater situation earlier this year. We certainly seem to be in a better place here in Southern Arizona and the Tucson AMA. There have been calls or requests from Arizona Department of Water Resources to share updated modeling of the Tucson AMA, but that hasn't been released yet. Situation on the Colorado River is obviously going to be something that will have a major effect and something we'll have to keep an eye on for sure. But the builders just have to just keep trucking on. They've got to do what they can to keep building and meet the market where it's at. And that really concludes my presentation. Appreciate the time to be with you today.
Thank you so much, David. We'll hold questions. I see there's several questions for David, and we'll hold them to the end of Will's presentation, and then we'll answer all the questions at one time. Thank you so much for joining us, David. I'd like to welcome Will White to present now. Will has led the Tucson Office of Land Advisor Organization for over 22 years. Under his leadership, the Tucson office has been recognized as the leading land brokerage company in Tucson by volume for over a decade. Will specializes in the representation of the Tucson area's top master plan communities in large-scale residential projects. His work with Southern Arizona home builders is well documented, and the office has been responsible for Tucson's most high-profile land transactions and assignments. Will currently represents Tucson projects with a lot inventory exceeding 22,000 future lots. Welcome, Will.
Good, thank you. Anytime I get to spend time with David is good on screen. David and I get to compare notes a lot, so we don't always agree, but I think we're starting to agree a little bit more these days of our supply issue, affordability, things like that. So thanks for having me. It's definitely gotten busier out there. The builders are buying land again feverishly, and we've seen that, and I'll talk about that a little bit as I go along here. But they're buying it because the market was better this year than anticipated. So if you go back to December and January, it looked pretty bleak. It looked like we were going to suffer from the interest rate hikes and what that did to mortgage rates. And so it really hasn't happened. And now we're looking at a year that we might permit about 20% above the projections. And so when that happens, you start chewing up land even faster than you had. And like David said, I mean, when land buying stops for 12 months, it's tough on this region. So, that is good news. And, I think we're going to continue to see some feverish buying because we've got to get land prepared to address this supply issue. With land, it's really just Econ 101. I mean, I've talked about this for a decade in Tucson. And, it's really the fact that we've got good demand on a very limited and dwindling supply of really buildable land, lots with infrastructure, lots that are entitled and approved and things like that. That pushes land pricing up. When land pricing goes up, then housing prices go up as well for new homes. And if anyone wants to argue any of this, I mean, look at land has doubled, finished lot price has doubled in the past 3 years. And housing is new home median's probably doubled in the past 7 to 8 years. So, you know, if it's going that way, that's because we've got this Econ 101 situation happening. My personal take is the supply issue is not fixable at this point. I mean, it's been created for a long time. We can maintain it, we can manage it, but supply, you can change policy quickly. You cannot change supply overnight. It's almost like that battleship that you have to turn around altogether. So let's talk a little bit about, you know, really what happened. Before COVID, we came into the COVID era extremely short on lots in Tucson, and then we hit COVID. When COVID hit originally, everybody stopped all the business completely. Right about March 2020, that business stopped. Deals canceled, all development activity stopped, and then we realized with the low mortgage rates and that situation that housing was going to be okay. Then it took off on an extreme, you know, surge through there. And then we had the interest rate issue basically in 22. So when that happened, you know, 22, then all the builders stopped again. So our market has been very reactive to this. So we were short going into it. And then we had these fits and starts where we'll sit in this region and not develop any land for a year. And I think Tucson and the Tucson Metro or Southern Arizona is not in a position that we should be doing that anymore. I mean, we cannot afford to take 12 months off of prepping land because we end up in these supply drains, and then we end up with the affordability situation that we're dealing with. Land is expensive right now. Materials are expensive. Labor is expensive right now. It's expensive to build infrastructure, and then housing and MLS supply is expensive. So really, what we're looking at, to give talking points right now, we've counted this up. We have 3 years of lots left that the builders either own or what can be delivered to them right now. There's 3 years of lots remaining. After that, we've got bigger issues like David alluded to with infrastructure, regional things that need to be concluded. So it's at a situation that is tough. And I think we need to talk about how we manage that and how we deal with it. So in land right now, it's really the golden rule of land. Those who have the land rule, and that's going to be the home builders that have controlled and acquired a multi-year pipeline to be able to grow their divisions and grow their business in Tucson. And then the developers that own that land, they're going to be able to charge premiums for it and actually offer the region a service, which is getting that land prepared for the home builders to add to our supply. But really, the table is set in Tucson. The table is set from the builders know who's going to be delivering them lots and who they can partner with to do that. And really the developers know at this point which builders are going to be their biggest customers. We also know, because of some constraints in the region and the infrastructure, what areas of Tucson Metro and Pima County that will, you know, develop and where this activity will be. So I think we know that. So it's really just maintaining it and managing it. So today I'm going to talk as fast as I can to move through this about kind of where we are. And then we'll talk about the supply situation, look at the demand situation, and then we'll talk about maps and where the activity is happening. So to give you an idea, here we are, October 2023. All the way through August, the home builders had only purchased 473 lots all year long. That was because we didn't know how the market was going to shake out. All of a sudden, things look good. And then in September, the builders closed 470 lots in 1 month, almost as much as they purchased all year long. So I think that's going to continue. It's going to stay busy. I talked about it. Tucson continues to be reactive instead of proactive to the, you know, supplying of land to create better, you know, community counts and to grow our housing potential. And if you look at it and you want to talk shortage, right now there's only a little over 1,100 lots that are completely shovel ready that the home builders can purchase right now. And those are lots that will have to be built, and that will take roughly about 24 months. I'll talk about that in a second. So those will be the lots that would be ready to resupply the builders when they continue to sell out of their communities. And that's looking around 25, 26 at this point. Problem is the market's going to require, because of demand, over 5,000 lots get out to market by 2025 and 26. So you can start to see the issues that we have as far as growing community counts, increasing land pipeline and supply. So because of that, the premium on finished lots and lots in Tucson is there. That's real. So our lot pricing on all of our offerings in the last 60 days, our owners have asked us to increase that 10 to 15%. Some of that's because of the premium and the shortage in lots, but a lot of that is due to the infrastructure costs to build those lots. They continue to be the same place they were last year or higher, and they were expensive already. If I see some challenges for the region, I think it's going to be difficult to rezone property in any, one submarket or any jurisdiction of Pima County. I think those are getting harder and harder. So those won't be ways that we can really totally count on to add to supply. But infrastructure, David mentioned this too. I'm looking at this whole region, and you go submarket by submarket, and because of all the business post-COVID that was pulled forward, we now have to look at growing these submarkets. We need, infrastructure is a concern, traffic, roads, utility capacity, who's going to design it, who's going to pay for it, how long is it going to take to build, interchanges, all this is going to come to a head soon. And it's kind of a situation where the region really outgrew its infrastructure, and that's another big concern. So permits, like David talked about, year to date 2775, we're down 10%. It's way better than it was at the start of the year. Permit volume has been picking up, and that's great. So we're tracking, we think, for about 3,700 permits, which would represent about a 20% increase over the forecast. And closings are strong too. Closings are down a little bit. I expect those to be green by the year end. The home builders have been working hard to close houses and doing a great job doing that. Community counts, David mentioned them as stores. That's the same thing we watch. We need to grow these community counts. And so right now, currently the region has 85 active communities open for sale all around Pima County. The problem is 35 of those communities have less than 30 lots to go, and they're sold out, 41%. 23 of them have less than 10 lots to go. And to put this into perspective, way back in 05 and 06, when we were doing a ton of business and the permit levels were 10 or 11,000 a year, you probably had 160 to 170 communities open for sale around Pima County. So now we're at this problem area where we're absorbing faster through the active communities, and we're not buying land and building it in a timely way to resupply it. And that's going to be what the region will face in the next 18 to 24 months. So let's look at what the builders are holding right now, because this is important. This helps to give you the timeline. The builders own in current and finished lots and open communities right now, just under 4,000 lots, 3,975. That's about 12 months of inventory based on the permitting levels that we're seeing. Platted and engineered lots that the builders own already that are under construction to reload that, about 2,187. That's an additional 7 months. They have a total combined count of 6,162, which represents 19 months until they would be sold out of all of the inventory that they currently own. So the next question is, and that puts it about June of 2025. The next question is, what can they go buy? What's next to reload this region? So we put this slide together. Finished lots, 170 that they could purchase. Those have been put together. They're in escrow. They're going to be closing here soon. So no more finished lots. P&E shovel-ready lots, we call P&E platted and engineered, approved, basically completely shovel-ready. Like I said, 1,136 lots. Now platted and engineered, but maybe you need some offsite construction or some utilities extended or some things like that to the property, 936. And then what we call partial paper, which are maybe preliminary plats or more engineering needs to be submitted and reviewed and approved in the different municipalities, 4,400 lots. That comes to a total of 6,118, similar to the count they have, which is about another 19 months worth of inventory. Past this, I don't have any solutions to where the land is going to come from. Now, there are properties that are zoned out there and larger scale, but they're going to have to be started from scratch. All the master infrastructure needs to be built. All the offsites are going to have to be to site. Any drainage concerns, floodplain, all this stuff needs to be solved. So it's really this race to try to bring on this, and I think infrastructure becomes a big issue. Now on this chart, this is interesting too. We wanted to show basically going out back to 1995 on our permit levels, but give you an idea about how many every 5 years, how many permits we go through. And our average is about 24,000 permits in Pima County every 5 years. So that's really translates into how many lots we have to the builders to be able to do those permits every 5 years. And if you look at what happened in our lean times here, we pretty much under permitted, the market, and that's, that caused the builders to not really rally to have to buy a lot of lots from our, the down cycle in 2011 to all the way to basically when COVID hit in 2019. There just wasn't a reason, an incentive to go out and buy a bunch of land, and that's how we came in short. And this is one of my favorite charts, but this is how we try to explain it, because in blue, this goes back to 2011. In blue are the permits annually that the builders pulled, and in yellow were the lots that they bought that year. So for a decade, pre-COVID, every single year, the builders burned through more land than they put back in the ground, to the tune of about 8,000 lots. And so you wonder if it would have been more even coming into this COVID era where these bars matched up, would we have been in a better position? Because as soon as COVID hit and that housing market took off in 21, well, the builders, came and created pipeline. They started to buy more land because they thought they would need it. Now, the problem is we went back last year with the interest rates increasing, and that's starting the fear of that. They stopped more land acquisition, and we permitted 3,500, but they only bought 2,000 lots to replace all that. This year's looking similar. We're probably going to have a situation where there's 2,500 lots purchased and we burn through 3,700 lots. But this is what's happening to create the lot supply shortage that then is the biggest culprit now to the affordability issue on the single family new homes in Tucson. So you look at that past, and then we go to the demand side of things. Well, again, 2018 to 21, those 5 years, the region absorbed 20,485 lots. This goes forward. This is our projections on permits for the next 5 years, basically 23 all the way to 27. In green, I think this is realistic about where we could get to, which takes us to about 5,700 permits by 2027. Here's a worst case scenario in red where we would pull back. And then, when you look at blue here, this is more reflective of maybe consumer demand for housing, getting us to about 8,000 permits over the next 5 years in 2027. But what's really interesting on the demand side of the land is that to do this, just this 5,700 permits right here, the region needs to build and deliver to home builders 23,500 lots to accomplish that. And it can't all be done on year 5. It needs to be evenly distributed out to the home builders as they go. So what I've looked at our office, and we've done some more data crunching here, we have a very hard time coming up with 23,500. So we're coming up with the lots I told you about, and probably some more if we can hustle to get some more communities with some other phases out, to about 17,000 lots over the next 5 years, realistically, that we can have out to the market, which puts us somewhere between this 3,000 number and this 5,700 number. But the shame of it is that we're not supplying enough land and doing enough permits to accommodate consumer demand for housing. So that's what we have to watch out for. And then, when we talk about how long it takes to actually bring lots to a point where they're a brand new community, I wanted to walk through this because we spend a lot of time with the home builders. It's taking longer to produce and develop the land into an active subdivision. So say they find a deal with us on one of our projects in Q3 of 2023. We're going to close that land acquisition Q4 of this year. Then they're going to mobilize and start construction on those lots. That's going to take them 18 months. It's going to take them all the way to Q3 2025. And keep in mind, when I showed it earlier, I said that, based on 19 months of lots, we're looking to, expire those in about June of 2025. So this already takes us to Q3 25. Then they start constructing models in Q3, Q4 of 25, and then those are open for sale Q1 2026. That's a total process of 24 months from land acquisition to development to model construction to opening the community for sales. So let's take a look now at the maps as we can go through this a little bit more. So what's also interesting post-COVID, because the land buying was so feverish, these were all the master plan communities in the Tucson metro region that were basically feeding the home builders, and they were partners of theirs as they went through. But this is what it looks like now post-COVID. All the land and all these projects that were feeding the home builders on a larger scale is done. They bought every last lot there was in them. So you're looking at a region now that really has only four active projects that have active home builders in them, that have their infrastructure in place, and that have more land to sell to these home builders. So this is another reason why it's been tough to get enough lots acquired and built and put out to the market and create these new communities. So you're going to see more of this. And then it's great to look at our area and everyone goes, there's so much land in Tucson and what's the big deal? And then, simply we just, we really have to just overlay the governmental land layers. And David alluded to this as well. And blue is the state trust land. That's close to between 900 to 1 million acres around Metro Tucson that's owned by the state. Now, if that land is released to auction, then it helps out the equation. If it's not, it acts as a constraint, and we've got to work in throughout it. Everything in black here can be national forest, national monument, BLM, all of that. But this is how Tucson looks, and it's interesting to know, when you think there's so much land out there and we really overlay this, we're forced into certain submarkets, and that's why I said kind of the table is set and we can start to understand what's going on. So I'm going to go through real quick just this area and kind of the momentum of growth, but I'm going to go north, central, south, and southeast, and then south. So if we look at the north area, this is Oro Valley all the way over to Marana. Rancho Vistoso has sold out of its land. Dove Mountain has sold out of the majority of its land, has a little bit left to go, but really the push on development, now that you have state trust land all the way from Dove Mountain to Marana, this is what the area looks like. This is what's left in a larger scale for the home builders to look at acquiring and developing and positioning themselves to, with North Marana probably being the biggest area through here. The question with this area too is there's big infrastructure concerns and continuing to go north of the immediate area, which is like Gladden Farms and some of the projects down here. And then more state land all the way north here. And that's why Red Rock Village, which is being developed by Sunbelt Holdings, which is a good client of ours who we're handling for, before when they bought that, no one knew that would work. But then as the supply started to constrain and all of a sudden, price points got higher in Tucson, now that becomes a more affordable option to drive another 10 minutes up I-10 and go to that community where we have about 3 builders active with about 700 home sites in one phase right now. And then you take another big area. This is a huge area of Tucson. This is really the southeast, Vail, central, southwest. These are our major corridors: Houghton Road to the east, I-10 pushing out southwest, Interstate 19 to the south, Valencia, and Ajo Highway pushing out to the southwest. Look at all the state trust land again here. Hundreds of thousands of acres of straight contiguous state trust land that can't be developed until they want to go ahead and start entertaining bringing that out in a bigger way. Santa Vera Indian Reservation here, so that's pushing that into Rancho Cerrito. But these big areas leave us with only, these areas now that can be, that the builders are focusing on. Rocking K is doing fantastic in Vail. It's the biggest project, commanding a huge market share out through there. And then future deals, there's potentially ability to open up a little bit here at State Route 83 and I-10, but this requires a lot of offsite infrastructure to be extended and probably some improvements to be made along here. So that's going to be hard to bring on. Verano here to the south central area. And then you've got to the southwest, Star Valley is doing very well as well. And then opening up 2 other big projects here. These are all zoned. These are platted to some extent. These are ready to go, but they need to be lifted off with a large amount of expensive infrastructure on a master level to open those projects up. But that's it, unless we change anything. That's the map. That's how it looks. That's where the builders are going to focus. And then going south again, same thing. I-19 to the south, Houghton Road to where it dead ends in Corona de Tucson. And you have the balance of Rancho Cerrito to continue to work there. Some other standalone pieces here, and then all probably, we're looking at about 1,500 units possibly left down here in Corona de Tucson over time, and that's it. All surrounded by state trust land, all surrounded by national forest, huge blocks of state trust land in the middle between these areas, and then all the mining operations to the west here that we can't touch for residential. So pretty difficult task ahead. So takeaways for me are, the last cycle, and I've seen both of these. The last cycle was completely oversupplied, 06 to 11. That's why the crash came so big and furious. This cycle is the opposite. We are short on MLS supply. We are short on new home community count. We're short on labor. We're short, depending on when it is, on material. And I think, the supply is the biggest issue here. We're going to continue to have that problem. We have historic lows in Tucson of active new home community counts and our MLS supply. When MLS supply is short, it pushes more of those buyers to new homes. It's just this kind of revolving cycle. And then, this is good, but, 2023 has outperformed all the forecasting. So if the region's going to stay strong again, and, maybe our fundamentals are very good, as George pointed out with, all you have to do is look around to, all the industrial that's getting built here, and then, the ability for new companies to come here, and those will bring people as well. I mean, I think our fundamentals are fantastic for the region. It's just how do we accommodate that? So the majority of our ownerships and developers are patient. They sold a lot of land during the COVID era. Their projects have been successful. So we're seeing zero pricing concessions into Q4 of this year on finished lots. And I don't think that we're going to see them. Number one, because there is a limited supply, and those should go as a premium. And also the cost to build those lots and to infrastructure them is increasing. So they need to cover those. You're going to have a situation in the greater metro area. The top 3 developers here are probably going to be the ones delivering about 80% of all the production lot inventory. So again, as I mentioned, the table is set. Our fundamentals are strong, though. Like I talked about, just drive around and see all this construction. It's one of the biggest reasons that concrete didn't go down, to build subdivisions for, because it was being used for all this new industrial that's being put up. So, I mean, you go to Marana, there's 1 million square feet of new spec space up through there. I mean, that the region hasn't seen that stuff ever happen here. So I'm excited for all that. And I think that's the kind of stuff that will drive our market. But we need, based on the 3 projections that I put up, between 15,000 and 34,000 lots to be built in this region in the next 5 years to keep up with demand. And I really, I think that's going to be, the supply thing is not going to be an easy thing to fix, and it's going to be very difficult to get to these levels. And then, if you're home builders right now, I mean, the home builders with the land will rule. And I think we're going to be a market where we have the top 3 home builders that have access to land. They're going to continue to control the majority of the market and the market share. But I could see a market where our top 3 or 4 home builders end up doing about 70% of everything that happens here. So I'm happy that things have turned the corner. I'm happy this year wasn't as bad as predicted, but from the supply standpoint, I'm not so sure that's fixable at this point. I think it's going to take some time, and I think it's going to take managing and maintaining and really working on the affordability issue here, though. Because when it's like this and it's good demand on little supply, then we kind of know how that ends up. So that's my part for today, and I'll turn it back over.
Great, thanks, Will. I'd like to ask David and George to now turn on their videos. Thank you. So we'll start the question and answer session, and I'll start with George. We have a ton of questions today, so if you're interested in staying on, we'll go through as many as we can this afternoon. So George, Tucson has had a high rate of employment, non-participation, particularly in the 24 to 55 age group. How does that coincide with low unemployment?
Right. Yeah, that seems weird that we would have a low unemployment rate and a low labor force participation rate. And that's true, but you want to keep in mind that what the unemployment rate measures is kind of the tightness of the labor market, and it's really focused on kind of the people who are most easily hireable. So these are unemployed individuals who are actively seeking employment. What the labor force participation rate, particularly for the prime age workforce, 25 to 54, tells us is, how many of those people who are either working or active, or if they're unemployed, actively seeking employment, how does that relate to the total population in that age group? And that's kind of a different sort of question, and it is possible to be low on both scales. And it's a difficult question. If the unemployment rate is low, why aren't we drawing more labor force participation? And kind of what that is when once people have been out of the labor force, they're not employed and they're unemployed in such a way that they're not actively seeking employment. Those are people that are hard to draw back to the labor force. Their skills have typically atrophied somewhat. They've kind of gotten used to being out of the labor market. Their resume doesn't look as good to employers if they are seeking employment. So it's a tough situation. What I would point out is we have seen the labor force participation rate tick up in 2021. I think it will do so again in 2022. So we are going to see some improvement in Tucson over time. Once we get the labor force participation data, that's about a little bit closer to what we're seeing in the unemployment rate. But I think I don't think it's going to solve the problem. It's not going to kind of close that gap with the nation.
Thanks, George. The next question I think is probably for you, David, but Will, if you want to jump in after David, feel free. So what are the trends in single family square footage, and are home sizes continuing to grow?
That's a great question. I know that I don't know specifically, but they're remaining fairly consistent. I don't think there's been a huge deviation. There was a period of time where the past few years they were ticking up a bit, but I think they're actually ticking down, but not deviating much in terms of home size.
Thanks, David. Will, so we've got a couple, and maybe this is for both of you, but Will, we've had a lot of questions about infill, and so I'll ask a couple of them. The first one is there opportunity for infill development in Tucson, especially where we see so many vacant commercial lots? And then another question on infill that talks about, I personally like to hear the figures about multifamily and urban infill. All new homes are not equally as valuable for the community. New single family homes in the suburbs typically add 1 to 2 cars on Tucson roads per household, while new urban infill and multifamily homes add 0 to 1 cars, meaning the former is much more sustainable and affordable for the taxpayers. The Tucson communities were poor and can't afford to keep building and maintaining new roads. Transit-oriented housing is significantly more valuable for Tucson. Either of you would like to address that question?
Well, I mean, you come back to land availability. So work through the infill areas and find where these parcels are. Now, it's not a bad comment to say, hey, maybe we look at these older buildings and we get the wrecking ball out, so to speak, and then we change those uses and create parcels. But if there was a ton of available land in the infill areas, it would be highly sought after, and it would be developed right now. So I think that's the same concern we're having in general. And David, you can chime in with this, but like, we don't have it. So, and if you had it, the other question is it zoned correctly, or do you have to go through a major effort to rezone that? Rezonings have turned to be pretty tough. I mean, it's a long drawn out process. It costs a lot of money to take on and endeavor with. And if, and the rate of success isn't that great. The neighbors have a lot of pull when it comes to any jurisdiction, and their voices get heard, and it's hard to open up that land. And that's why we probably haven't seen more of that in. But yes, as time goes on, if we find out that one sector isn't as useful, maybe those buildings become something that can be turned into, that can be basically demolished. And then we end up with new parcels in specific locations where we can do density. So I would agree with that. And I'll just add too, real quick, to the other question, is that the square footage is, I mean, it looks to me like there's still going to be this continual push to affordability. So you're going to probably look at, designing smaller for a while to try to get these houses to be more affordable. Now, and it also depends geographically on the area. Some areas can, different areas command the ability to bring in, bigger houses. But I think for the most part, the home builders are really focusing on how do we manage and tackle this affordability issue. And one way is to get the houses smaller, and one way is to design new product that is kind of new era, but denser. And then, that's one way to do it as well.
Right. And that's a good lead into a comment we had on both home prices and affordability. And one, that's median home prices have been doubling since 2017. Wages have not been keeping pace. And this is exactly on point with what we talk about with housing affordability and how much it's declined over the last several years, is that wages just aren't keeping pace with home prices, and especially with those mortgage payments we're seeing with increased interest rates. And we'll go back to that topic in just a moment. But there was I think a little surprise when I mentioned that income measure that was used to calculate housing affordability. And so that housing, I wanted to talk about that just briefly. That number I used, 86,000, that comes from HUD, which is the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. And that is a projection. That is a projected income number for 2023 based on median family income. And so for reference, median family income from the census in 2021 for Tucson was $75,199. So that was 2 years ago. So that projection isn't really out of line. What I think a lot of people confuse is median family income with median household income. Median household income is substantially lower in the Tucson metropolitan area. It is $59,215 in 2021. And that main difference is when the census calculates median household income, that includes households that could just be one person. So that would be younger individuals living alone, older individuals on fixed income living alone. And when they calculate median family income, that includes two individuals or more. And so often those households are dual income households, so which bumps up that income value by quite a bit. As we see in Tucson, it's about $20,000 higher in Tucson. And so again, HUD is projecting, National Home Builders Association is projecting, using that HUD projection for 2023, and they're projecting that based on prior year, often 2-year-old income measures from the census. And so if there's any questions about that, I'm happy to go into that further offline. Let's go now to David, a question on did your mortgage payment numbers include PMI or local taxes?
It did, but it was just a generic online calculator. I didn't plug in Tucson specific data for taxes.
Okay, yeah, I wanted to follow up on that. We actually wrote an article in March of this year where we looked at when interest rates were starting to go up, how much things changed based on interest rates, and we did a bunch of calculations, and I'm going to put that link in the chat for everybody. But we did different calculations based on different interest rates, based on local taxes, based on homeowners insurance, and then also based on if you were putting 10% down and when you would have a PMI payment, or if you were putting 20% down and you didn't have that PMI payment. So we have a pretty good detailed article on that for Tucson and some of our peer metropolitan areas, and so I'll share that in the chat if anybody's interested in that. And then George, we'll go back to you. There's some migration questions, and a lot of migration is, what are the key factors driving the large migration from California to Arizona? Is that expected to continue, or was that kind of just a COVID, happened during COVID? And then another question is, what about international migration? One of our questions was that they've seen a lot of migration for business owners from Canada and Mexico into the Tucson region. And so if you could comment on that, please.
Sure. So at the national level, we have seen immigration to the U.S. bounce back very nicely. It's back to pre-COVID levels. So that certainly helped overall population growth nationally. And I have no doubt that Tucson and Arizona as a whole are picking up their share more than our share of those international migrants. When you hear me talking about net migration, for Arizona or Phoenix or Tucson, that includes both the domestic migrants, people moving across states, and international migrants, all lumped into one number. So the surge in net migration that we saw in Arizona, Phoenix, and Tucson during the pandemic, that was a one-time thing. It was connected in large part to the surge in work from home related to the pandemic. That's a one-time thing. We won't get that kind of boost to migration going forward. So in my forecasts, our forecasts call for net migration to remain strong, but not at the levels we saw in 2021 and 2022. I think there are some risks to the net migration forecast revolving around what's happened to the cost of living. One of the reasons that we draw significant numbers of migrants from California is for a lower cost of doing business, a better regulatory and tax climate, and a lower house prices, so greater housing affordability. Some of that's been reduced recently, but it's if you think of Tucson's housing affordability share at 38.6% in the second quarter, in LA in the second quarter, 3.2% of the homes sold were affordable to a family making the median in LA. So we've still got a big advantage over most California metros, particularly LA. So I think Arizona is still going to draw a lot of migrants from California. That'll be connected to our business climate and our overall cost of living.
David and Will, this is a question for both of you, is given the tight supply of land for development, are you seeing that developers are reducing lot sizes and increasing density?
I'll start with that. Yeah, I mean, that's been the goal. It goes along with reducing the square footage of the houses. I mean, that's been the orders. I think when you look at, we kind of plan these out by lot widths, and I think if we went back 7 or 8 years ago, we'd see more lots that were 50 feet wide or bigger. And now we've definitely moved into a market that is probably 40 feet to 50 feet as the majority of the requests from the home builders. And those are the lot sizes. So we're seeing density. We'd like to see more. I mean, I'd like to see some more creative product to address affordability. And I don't know, we seem to continue to just have the 30-foot house and the 35-foot house. And so if that's something, I mean, I do believe that our developers would make way for that type of product if it was requested or shown to them. But for the most part, you have to just plan the projects, based on what the demand is.
I agree with that. I think Will's right. And the one thing that I always keep in mind is that there's just a tremendous amount of risk that the builders have to undertake in very little certainty. And they're very, very good at research and data to determine what the consumer wants. And so they're really being responsive. And so as the consumer preferences change in terms of square footage, in terms of trying to meet a particular price point, lot sizes, they're going to adapt, and then they're going to go to Will's clients and ask for changes in that. I definitely think when it comes to increased density, that absolutely has an effect on infill development. But Will touched on it. We have just seen over and over again where there's been a tremendous amount of resistance to density, to increased height, and all of those things just serve to drive up cost and diminish certainty and increase risk. So, I've seen there are a lot of other communities. I've studied a little bit what they've been doing in places like Portland to try and increase infill development. And a lot of it is that type of density, really getting creative on accessory dwelling units, those types of things. I think that's where I mentioned like the tools in the toolbox. We really need to look at all the potential tools in the toolbox and try and make them available to increase options and increase speed to market.
Great, thanks, David. We have we're a little over time, so we have a couple more questions. We'll answer if you guys have a moment to stay on. But we're kind of wrapping up with questions here. The next one, I think both to you, Will and David again, is given the dwindling inventory of new home options in the region and high demand, do you think the rate of consumption in the currently available developments is going to accelerate?
Yeah, when we get limited with our options, then like I said, I had that nice picture showing 4 master plan communities that we can effectively sell out of that aren't, at almost that sell out or build out of their land. Then those 4 are going to absorb faster either way, because that's all there is. We're not able to kick over rocks and find a 500-acre piece of property that nobody knew about and get that developed as a standalone deal. So that's why I think, to David's point too, in the slides, the master plan communities, they probably represent 75 to 80% of the product that goes out to the marketplace. So if those start to be constrained down to 1 to 4, communities in all of Tucson that can deliver, then their absorptions are going to pick up, because that's the place you need to go. So the goal for the region would be to open up more master plan communities on a larger scale to be able to offer, more product and more competitive product. And, I think the barriers to doing that are infrastructure, like we talked about, and also just zoning of those properties and entitling them and working them through reviews and approvals. David and I talk about this a lot. The region's infrastructure, and even if you were to figure it all out for the next round right now, it's really the implementation of that. So you have to design it all, you have to fund it all, and you have to build it all. So that whole process can take years to do before we could really bring on any other projects to assist with what's going on. So in the meantime, those projects are going to continue to sell better, and that product will sell better and faster because that's what's left.
David, what do you think about the current inventory, the housing inventory on the market? Do you see that going back to continuing to decline like we saw in 2021?
In terms of like the resale inventory?
Yeah, the resale of inventory, the current homes available.
I do think, as long as mortgage interest rates stay where they are, and if you're locked in at a lower rate, there's not going to be much of an incentive to move. And so I do foresee low inventory being a persistent problem, at least near and midterm.
And then, Will, to follow up on a comment you made, we have a question, and I think, about the infrastructure needs is who is positioned to take the lead on expanding the needed infrastructure to facilitate more available land?
Yeah. David is.
So I think,
I think it's all David. David's going to do it for all of us. He's going to save the whole region by himself. So, no, we've talked about it. I'd like to hear David's comments too, but you have to lead to do that. You have to identify the situation and lead into it. And that's where we have to go faster with this. Now, the financing mechanisms, a lot of people would say developers should pay for all the infrastructure. Well, that's not going to happen because developers only pay for it when their projects start. And that's the trick to this, okay? They're not going to sit and write checks to build things when the market's not good or they're not, being productive. So there are other ideas as far as that have been used in the past of bonding districts and ways to raise the money for the developers and builders to slowly pay that off over a long period of time. I think that's probably one of the best approaches that the region should look at. But there's too many different ideas, and it has to get built. So where's the money going to come from, and who's going to lead that charge? It takes somebody to lead it, and it's going to take somebody probably from each jurisdiction to some extent that deals with their own area, and because each area, it's not just one area of Pima County that has the issue, it's several areas. So David?
Will, I think you nailed it there. I mean, I think that's the reality. We need to look at alternative kind of financing vehicles to be able to upfront these infrastructure costs, because it's very hard for lenders or investors to upfront the tremendous costs for the infrastructure, and depending on what the payback period is for how they're going to sell homes. So we've got to figure out a way to get creative. I do think that we need to take a truly regional approach to this, and we've been able to do that in things like the RTA and the roadway system. But I also think we're going to have to apply, I'm not saying the same thing, but certainly that type of community collaborative approach to other aspects of our infrastructure to be able to plan. Because just, the numbers are the numbers. We're going to have a certain amount of people building here. We're going to have a certain amount of certain amount of demand. I mean, we'll talked about it. You're kind of at that, even in the bottom range, 3,000 homes are going to be built a year. Where are we going to do that? And we should be thinking and planning our infrastructure to be able to accommodate that. Absolutely. Is there a responsibility for builders and developers? Of course, but just trying to think of it more holistically and comprehensively, I think is going to position us best for long-term success.
And one quick tricky thing too is that the cost to build all that has gone through the roof too. So like horizontal infrastructure, just to give an example, probably over the last 6 or 7 years is up like 50 to 60% increase just to build subdivisions. So when you get into major infrastructure that needs to be put in, that's the hard thing to swallow too, is the cost to do all that's very expensive.
Great. We have one last question, and it's probably better for another map talk. It's a little off, it's on topic, but it's aside, and that is how do we see all of these factors influencing, or how are they going to impact homelessness in the future for Tucson? And, I'll start, and is that we see, when we think about housing affordability at the center, at the Economic and Business Research Center, and we talk about housing affordability, and we talk about these housing cost burden rates, and we look at higher housing cost and burden rates for our lower income individuals compared to the nation, is, that all factors into homelessness, and it plays a role. Low housing affordability, high housing cost burden rates definitely has an impact. And so maybe it's a topic for another day, but any quick thoughts that you guys have on that would be great.
Well, I guess what I would say is, we need to be looking at the full, housing continuum, everything from, temporary shelter for people who are homeless, all the way up to the luxury housing market. And until and unless all of those different segments are hitting on all cylinders, there are going to be problems and challenges that have some unintended consequences. Homelessness, or continuing to exacerbate that, or the housing burden is going to stick around. I know that the city of Tucson, I talk about there, and I can't remember if it was in their HAST and P-CHIP plans, and don't ask me to tell you what those stand for, but there's a nice kind of explanation about the different segments, for that AMI 60%, there's housing for people at 60% AMI or lower, 80% or lower, entry level, first move up, second move up. And I think that's where we need to look at those different segments and try and come up with solutions in each of those. But of course, the homelessness piece is critical for our community, especially right now. And it has to be a focus of what we're trying to tackle.
Yeah, excellent. And on that note, I'll just mention that we're going to hold another MAP talk in November 15th. Correct me if I'm wrong on the date, George, but November 15th. And that's going to look at a white paper that was written by a professor at the University of Arizona on housing vulnerability. And we'll have some additional guest speakers, hopefully from the city and the county, joining us to talk about housing vulnerability. And I'm sure that topic of homelessness is going to come up in that MAP talk. So thank you so much, Will, George, David, for joining us, for sharing what information you have with us about Tucson's housing market. We really appreciate your time today. And this will be recorded, and I'll publish it on the MAP dashboard. I'll share it with those that are registered. So if you attended today and would like to share it with any of your colleagues, look for an email early next week with the recording. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Jennifer. Thanks, Will and David.
Okay.